All right, let's continue. So here's two new cities on here for our WeDo. This is Reykjavik. This is in Iceland. If you want to find that on your globe, that is very far north. Um, it's in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's very, very far north. And you'll notice it has very extreme, longest daylight, almost 22 hours out of 24, like very extreme because it's very far north. And very extreme shortest day, only like 4 hours of daylight in the winter because it's very far north. The farther north, the more extreme. New York City is in the US, of course. It's not as extreme. It's kind of far north in the US, but in terms of the whole world, it's not that far north. So some things to notice about this. One, you can just use this graph to find out how much daylight either city is going to have in any season you want. Say, okay, so February, the beginning of February, Reykjavik's going to have about 7 hours of daylight. And New York City's going to have about 10. Or if you wanted to look in September, beginning of September, New York City's going to have about 13 hours of daylight, and Reykjavik's going to have about 15 hours of daylight, things like that. So this just shows you how much daylight are they going to have in different points of the year. And especially if you want to compare that to seasons, you can do that. Winter, I think, everyday life, we think about being like December, January, February. You'll notice pretty short amounts of daylight in the winter. And then if you want to think about summer, most people think of summer being like June, July, August. You'll notice pretty long amounts of sunlight in the summer. So that's just sort of the main things. Anything you want to pause here and jot down to just understand how these graphs work, please go ahead. I'll leave Iceland very far north, US here. Unpause when you're ready to go. We're going to do vocabulary next. All right, so some big vocabulary words to know. The first is here. This day right here. Should we put it maybe like here? So this is the shortest daylight in the Northern Hemisphere. And that is called the winter solstice. And you'll notice both places in the world have their shortest day on the winter solstice. New York City has about 9 hours of daylight at the winter solstice. Reykjavik has about 4 hours of daylight at the winter solstice. Very short. It's the shortest daylight in the Northern Hemisphere. It's called the winter solstice. It's around, not exactly necessary, around December 20th most years. It can be a day before, after, 2 days before, after, something like that. But it's around December 20th. You'll notice it's late in December. It's not the beginning of December. It's about right here where the graph hits its bottom. Similar to that, there's also around here, there's also the longest daylight. In the Northern Hemisphere. We call that the summer solstice. Both the longest and the shortest day are called solstice, and it's around June 20th, somewhere give or take. And we would officially say that that's the first day of summer. I know that your, school summer starts way before that. This is just in science. Hot weather is here before that in Georgia. We would just say that that's the first day of summer in science, and we would say that this is the first day of winter in science. Doesn't mean that it can't be cold before that or snow before that or anything. It's just like, that's what we say. The other big thing to know here, this day right here and this day right here, those are both called an equinox. And that is 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night. And everywhere on Earth has these on the exact same days. So the equinox, there are places, every place on Earth has 12 hours a day and 12 hours a night, 2 times a year. One of them is around March 20th, and one of them is around September 20th. And those are called the spring and the fall equinox. And then the seasons we say are in between. So for instance, from here to here, we say that that is spring. And then from here to here, we say that is summer, and so on and so forth like that. So we kind of measure our seasons in science from the longest day to the shortest day. Okay. So last thing, go ahead and pause here, write down as much as you need. Remember, notes are for you, they're not for me. I need you to know what a solstice is. That's a vocabulary word to expect to see on assessments. What an equinox is, 12 hours, shortest, longest, things like that. So take the notes you need to take. Make sure you understand. This is a nice day too. You can rewind if you caught yourself zoning out or not listening. Writing it if you don't understand it won't help you a whole lot moving forward. So feel free to just pause, rewind, whatever you need to do. Last thing I want you to be able to do is explain what you see here. I want you to be able to explain this to somebody. What does it show? What does it mean? And how does it work? So I would want to be able to explain something along the lines of comparing the two. So we would see that Reykjavik and New York City both have different amounts of daylight at different times of year. That's the first thing to expect. They have more daylight in summer, less in winter. That's a biggie first. So like if we look at any kind of summer months, like May, June, July, August, you'll notice they all have lots of daylight. If we look at winter months, December, January, February, they're both low. Reykjavik is closer to the North Pole. So its longest and shortest days are extreme compared to New York. That's the other big thing to notice. Reykjavik, the longest day is 21 hours, and the shortest day is like 4. They're really, really extreme. If you get toward the poles, these extremes happen. And as you saw in that last graph, if you're all the way by the pole, you can even get graphs where they go kind of like this, and they just stay at 24 hours all summer. And then they start their way down. They have the same equinox, and then they just stay dark all winter. It's like very extreme, and it changes by a whole lot. So I think those are the big things to kind of take away from this here. Reykjavik and New York City both have different amounts of daylight at different times of year. And Reykjavik's closer to the North Pole, so its longest and shortest days are extreme compared to New York. Again, pause here and add these to your notes, and you should be good to go to the next slide with me. All right, so this is your you do together. So check with that table partner, and when you're both ready, here are some things to know about this. Explain why these two cities have such opposite changes in daylight throughout the year. So now with what I understand, this is New York City, which we just talked about. It's in the Northern Hemisphere, hint. This is in Melbourne. Melbourne is a city in Australia, which is in the Southern Hemisphere. So you'll notice these are very different with your table partner. Talk them over. Why does New York City have 15 hours of daylight in June? And Melbourne has only 9 in June. But Melbourne has 15 in December, whereas New York City has only 9 in December. Talk to your table partner. What is going on there? Use your globe if you need to. Use drawings if you need to. Use words if you need to. And go ahead. Unpause when you're. All right, last thing for you. You do alone. Let me do some explaining here. So this is a graph of the amount of daylight in Fairbanks, Alaska throughout the year. This black line here shows Fairbanks's amount of daylight. If you would, ignore this orange line. We're not going to talk about what it means, civil twilight. We're just going to talk about daylight, so don't worry about that. But this shows the amount of daylight in Fairbanks, Alaska. It looks like it bottoms out a little under 4 here, and it tops out a little over almost at 22 here. Very extreme amounts of day and night. Let me show you where it is on the map. It's about right here on the map. It's like in the very, very close to this circle where above this line you stay in the dark. It would have an orbit about like that. So what I need you to do is explain to me on a sheet of paper why Alaska gets only about 4 hours of daylight at the winter solstice right here, about 4 hours. Before you do that, let me just show you what that even looks like. This is pretty cool. I found this Grammarly ad. And you can see the sun rising and setting at this time of year when it's only out for 4 hours in Fairbanks. It's pretty cool. So this is the sun rising in Fairbanks in the winter, again, when they only have daylight for about 4 hours. So it's about 11 o'clock in the morning, still dark till 11 a.m., you can imagine. And up comes the sun. And right, this is a time lapse, so it's going to show you the whole day in 2 minutes. But up comes the sun. And it only really makes it like that high into the sky in Fairbanks in the winter. That's it. Just barely rises above the horizon. And over the course of the day, moves across the sky super, super low. This is halfway through the day, solar noon, just sort of like it's been 2 hours since the sunrise. It's only going to be up for about 4. And it's already on the way down, and that's all the high it got. And down it goes. And that's it. That's what the entire day, 4 hours, not even probably of daylight in Fairbanks, Alaska looks like on the winter solstice. On the shortest day of the year, the sun just goes boop and boop and sets. And that's all you get if you're up there. So back to you to Alone, what I need you to explain for me. According to this graph, we see that Fairbanks only gets about 4 hours of daylight at the winter solstice. Why is that? Use the data, use what you know about the daylight, write it on some paper, put your name on it, and turn it in. I'm going to ask you to pause here. I'm going to wrap this video up in 10 seconds. So pause so you can see what you need to do, and then you're set.